Hi everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo with another video for you. This is very hastily put together because just, minutes, well, more like a half hour before I started making this video, I was watching a video by Alan that he posted. In fact, I think he posted it today. Posted today, asking the question. This is Alan at Static Traveler, and he's asking the question, has your musical taste evolved? And it was a really interesting question as he, presented it, and got me thinking, and I was going to type a comment, and I realized that, wow, I had a lot to say. So that's why I decided I, would put together, this video. And it's interesting as I thought about, what I listen to now, how my musical tastes have evolved ever since I began listening to music. It's interesting to me anyway, in how my taste in music began in one area, and then as I experienced music as growing older, how that changed. And a couple things I really came to recognize were the musical influences that were around me in my environment. And I go back to like when I was 5, 6 years old, and I was listening to, my mother is probably my first most important musical influence. And she had this giant volume. It was called the Golden Treasury of Classical Music. And so it had all these, records in there, and there was information about the pieces and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just remember listening to the music and learning to read, because by 6 years old and 7 years old, I was a pretty avid reader. So I'm reading the notes a little bit in there and getting what I can out of it. And just remembering listening to pieces by Grieg and the Peer Gynt Suite. And I remember being so obsessed with Schubert's Unfinished Symphony. And then, of course, hearing many other very classic pieces. And then there was one record in particular that she had, it was this one here, Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf. And I listened to that, and this is not the same copy that she had, but I went and I found the exact recording, that was on the Angel record label, that I listened to as a kid with Peter Ustinov as the narrator. And then there was, the Toy Symphony, Haydn's Toy Symphony. So these were these influences coming from my mother. But the other thing that my mother listened to was, I guess, what you would call, musical pablum, because she listened to a lot of Ray Conniff, Paul Moriarty, the Mantovani Orchestra, so I was listening to this material as well. So I have this weird like balance going on. And as I'm growing up, then I'm the youngest in my family of 6 kids. And so my older siblings, what they were listening to, I'm gradually being exposed to, with 45s, mostly at the start. And, it's pop music, like, the Cowsills and Paul Revere Narrators and, Herman's Hermits, and listening to these to these songs. And then there was the one that we had, of course, was Sukiyaki, by this guy here, Q Sakamoto. And, because of that, remembrance, I, went and finally found a copy from that. But remember hearing that. And, then later in life, learning, what the song was really about. So my whole experience with my musical taste, like many people, I'm being influenced by others around me, and mostly, with my siblings. And then there were things that I was dismissive about, in my childhood that now, I'm listening to or began listening to later in life. For example, I was fairly dismissive about the Monkees. And I mean, I watched the TV show, but I wasn't buying their records. I was more of a Beatles person listening to them. Although, still I was too young to be buying records. But later in life, I really came to appreciate the Monkees and their music and their contributions. Then I think the other thing that helped me with my own awareness of music, appreciation of music, and then openness to music. The openness still took a while to develop, but it was learning to play an instrument. So when I was like 6 or 7, I started piano lessons, but I didn't like the piano. It just never, it might have had something to do with my piano teacher. I really didn't like her. But anyway, as I got into like 4th grade, and that's when they're largely introducing kids to musical instruments, that's when I picked up the saxophone. And so I played the saxophone all the way through high school. I did not really do anything much with it after high school. But so I'm involved in the music program and playing saxophone. And my mother bought me Boots Randolph records because not only was Boots Randolph a saxophone player, there were releases at the time that had sheet music in with the record so that I could play along with Boots Randolph. So and then in high school, I was really fortunate to have a band director. And also, I was with a group of classmates who we were all really quite talented. So our band director gave us more and more challenging music to play. Anything from Shostakovich to even Philip Glass. So we would try, and play these. And so there was this other, I just was experiencing a lot of music, and I was able to appreciate various genres. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't grow up with prejudices with music. I mean, I really didn't like, for, a long time, pretty much all country music. Didn't listen, to Johnny Cash and other, country musicians. But when I sort of began to be exposed to some country rock genres, then, things started to open up, and, I came to appreciate, some country artists. I mean, country music, all genres of music have within them very innovative artists and composers, and then others who are just producing, pop music, even though it's country or whatever. Same thing happened to me with, for example, rap music, which initially I was very dismissive about. And I will admit, my dismissiveness was largely because I was unaware of my own racist thinking about the music. And over time, however, um, again, as I began listening to more and more and listening without prejudice, listening with an open mind, uh, same thing. I discovered that there were artists within this genre who were really quite amazing with what they were producing, as well as there were artists in the genre who were just producing schlock, to sell records and get played on the radio. So yeah, it's interesting, how these things do develop, but I was still largely being guided by my peers. Although I think with my peers, even, I was probably the most eclectic one of the bunch. I was often finding or listening to something that was a little outside of what we were generally listening to, and sharing it with them. Growing up listening to Frank Zappa, I mean, the first Frank Zappa album was absolutely free that I listened to. My brother had it, and I was like 10 years old, and I can remember, wow, this is like really kind of cool. So all these different things are going on, but I was still kind of, I won't say a rut, but, I wasn't getting a lot of exposure to different things. My exposure to jazz did not happen until jazz fusion became a thing. And then that kind of opened me doors for me to kind of go backwards into jazz history and, learn about that. So then there were, other musical genres that I became aware of. Zydeco was something that I didn't know anything about until, later in my adult life. And while I am, for the most part, I'm an atheist, so spiritual music didn't really, if it was really focused on its spirituality, so to speak, I didn't want to listen to it. But then, I hear a band like The Call, and it's the music that they're creating, and they're not being heavy-handed with what they're singing about. And I, really, really, enjoyed that. And then, of course, in high school, I was very dismissive, but that was a peer thing, of disco music and dance music and that kind of thing. I wasn't even listening to a lot of funk at that time, although there was a lot of great funk recordings coming out. But, eventually, I'll listen to something that is, like this, culture beat that is, it's not highbrow music, but I was able, to appreciate it, and then, actually build up a collection of dance music. And then more recently, maybe within the last 5 or so years, I became more open to music that was non-English. Because, again, back up a little bit, when I would listen to music, I was a person who was very much focused on the lyrical content to the music as well as the musical content. I saw how they could go together well. And when they didn't go together well, it was music I didn't necessarily want to listen to because it wasn't going together well. But if it wasn't in English, I really didn't listen to it. But then that changed also, probably, within the last 5 or so years. I became aware of this pop artist, Chang Yushen, Taiwanese pop star. And it's pop music. I mean, that's what it is. It's really simple pop music. He's been known by the moniker of the Taiwanese Whitney Houston because he does have a remarkable vocal range. But even though I couldn't understand anything that was being said, the music connected with me. And on a few songs, I did make efforts to translate them so that I could actually then understand what was being sung about. And what I found remarkable is that after translating, I was like, wow, the feeling and thinking that I was experiencing listening to the song is I was on the right track, because here, going with the translation, what I thought the song was about is what the song was about. And that was, kind of a cool experience. It was probably in the late 80s, not late 80s, but maybe the early 80s, late 70s, that, I bought my first electronic album, and that was, this Tangerine Dream album, Exit, which is not really one of their best ones in their catalog, but it was my first one. And again, it just kind of opened up this arena, the genre of music, that I have been dabbling in since. And then going back to the non-English music and pop music, I mean, I listen to, I don't have any in my collection, but I listen to BTS from time to time, and I appreciate what it is that they are doing. And part of that is because of this band called Akmu, which is a Korean singing duo, brother and sister. Again, it's just pure pop. But listening to it and then translating, I found some translations of some of the songs as well, grew my appreciation for it. Although I will say some of their more recent material is a little meh in my point of view. But it's just, how the music has changed, or my experience with it. Another band that I was aware of in the late 1970s and 80s, but I never listened to them, was the Residents. And where is my Residents collection? It's right behind me, I think, here someplace. Yeah, so I mean, I've got a substantial collection of albums by the Residents. So what's interesting, I guess, in my musical taste and how they evolved, and this is turning into a long video. I mean, Alan's video was like 8 minutes, and here I am at 17 because I can just talk. But what's I think is interesting in how my musical tastes have evolved is that I'm really open to strangeness. And what I find baffling at times is some of the more mainstream stuff. Bands like Oasis, Coldplay, Radiohead, even My Bloody Valentine to a degree. I'm like, I don't get them. And they never really appealed to me. And then there are bands that I used to listen to a lot growing up that I don't listen to so much anymore. Not because I dislike them, it's just not the same experience anymore. Led Zeppelin is a great example. I mean, when Led Zeppelin was producing records, I mean, I was buying them and I was digging Led Zeppelin and playing it all the time. But nowadays, I've got all the Led Zeppelin, regular studio albums, and I very seldom listen to them. I have a lot of Beatles, and I like the Beatles, but I don't listen to them very much. And my musical tastes now are very much focused on what's happening in new music with new artists. I've talked a lot about Car Seat Headrest. Then there's also this new band, Geese, that I've been listening to. And then there are other more recent bands that I've been hearing about and really diving into. And I'm, Mouse on the Keys, Toe, again, bands that sometimes are not singing in English, but their music is just really, really tantalizing. And I enjoy listening to it. So, all right, that's 20 minutes. That's enough. Thank you for listening to me ramble about this. And don't forget to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.